Well, hi, I'm Jeff Strong. I'm creator of the Auditory Brain Stimulation Therapy Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention. I'm also co-founder and creative director of BrainShiftRadio.com. Now in this video I want to talk a little bit about the state of flow. This place we're in when we're exceptionally creative, we are in this zone where we're losing track of time and we're making connections that we don't generally make. This is a great state to be in for creativity and problem solving and high performance. So it's also a very specific state that we can enhance or at least induce with drumming. And so I want to talk about how to do that in this video. Now there's several things going on with this idea of flow. One is on a brainwave state, we're kind of in this transition zone between the alpha and the theta state of consciousness. Now, our normal wakeful state is beta. It's a very fast state where there's a lot of fairly chaotic rhythms going on, just a lot of variable rhythms depending on what we're attending to and what activity we're doing. As we get into the state of alpha, and I talk a lot about alpha in my videos, and I specifically talk about the mid to the low end of alpha. All of our REI custom programs, for instance, are at 8 beats per second. That's the low end of the alpha state of consciousness. This is a state where we're neurologically calm, but we're still outwardly directed. We're still aware and focused on our outer world. So for people who have sensory processing issues, which is most of the clients we deal with, this is a great state to be in to be able to help them learn how to process sensory information better. If we go a little bit faster into alpha, 9, 10, 11 beats per second, now we can enhance focus because we're getting the brain still in this relaxed state, but now we're activating the brain. A few weeks ago I did a video on how to enhance cognitive function with drumming. I talked about 9, 10, 11 beats per second, very complex, unpredictable patterns to activate the brain. And then as well, I've talked a lot about theta. Theta is an internally directed state. It exists between about 4 beats per second, 4 hertz or cycles per second, up to around 8 beats per second, cycles per second. This state is an internally directed state at the very low end. We're in a deep meditation. This is the state that shamans have used for tens of thousands of years to help them do their journeys, their visualizations. People who meditate get into this deep state. I've talked about how we can use drumming, a very repetitive rhythm, to help you achieve that state in just minutes without having to work so hard on mindfulness. So this is all this is the concept of entrainment. We're able to synchronize the brain to the underlying pulse of the rhythms because that's what the brain wants to do. It's called brainwave entrainment. It's pretty common. There's a lot of rules you have to follow. In the last video I talked about how as you go through these different levels of consciousness, you have to change your approach to the rhythms in order to make the brain be engaged to it or with it. So for instance, the lowest end of theta, that deep meditative state around 4 beats per second, you want a super repetitive rhythm because we're internally directed. We don't want anything pulling us out, anything that's somewhat unpredictable or novel. Our brains are going to key into it and all of a sudden be activated trying to decipher the pattern. Well, you don't want that when you're in the low end of theta state of consciousness because that pulls you out into a more outwardly directed state. So at that really low end, you want a repetitive rhythm that allows the brain to entrain without pulling the awareness away from it. As you speed up, you need a little bit of variability because you're becoming more aware. So at 8 beats per second here, at the low end of alpha, we need to have enough unpredictability and variability that keeps the brain engaged so that the entrainment can happen. Because if you play just a steady pulse at 8 beats per second, the brain deciphers the pattern and shuts down because it's no longer relevant, it's no longer interesting. It's no longer anything that needs to be deciphered. So the trick is to figure out how much novelty you need at that point to activate the brain without overdoing it. So when I talk about flow, this is a really important piece. How much variability and activation do you do in order to get flow to happen? Now flow exists on a brainwave state level, the transition between the theta and the alpha state of consciousness. Alpha, like I said, is 8 to 12, 8 to 13 beats per second. Theta is 4 to 8. Right around that transition between 7 and 8 is where we want to be in when we're in flow. And I like 7, 7.5. My favorite is around 7.4. And so I'll play rhythms at about that tempo to help the brain become engaged and entrain at that level. So then the question becomes, how variable does a rhythm need to be in order to make that happen? And I'm going to play some examples for you today to show you what this feels like if I'm playing not enough variability and too much variability and what it feels like to be kind of in the right place with it. The pattern I'll play today is something I use a lot in my videos as a demonstration. I think it's a really great rhythm to use because it's something we're all familiar with. You've heard this rhythm a million times. It's called a mambo. It's also a 3-3-2 rhythm. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. Pretty simple. So let me play this rhythm about 6 beats per second. You can get a feel what it's like to have a little bit of variability to help with entrainment. I'm not going to play too long because I want to get to kind of the crux of this video in a minute. But this is what this sounds like. I'm going to play about 5.5, 6 beats per second. Pretty comfortable. You can play that all day long, and this is enough variability to get you into that mid theta 5.5, 6 beats per second space. Great space for enhancing intuition. But if I want to get into flow, I need to play a little faster. If I'm playing a little faster, I can't play this particular rhythm. As a matter of fact, I will play this rhythm for you, and you can get a sense for what this feels like. And I'm actually going to use my metronome to set my tempo because I want to be fairly precise in this. Now, when I set the metronome at 7.5 beats per second, I'm going to set the metronome to be playing quarter notes while I play 16th notes. So what that basically means is for every click in the metronome, I'm going to play 4 drumming beats. This also means for me to play it around that tempo of 7.4 beats per second, which is my favorite flow tempo, I'm going to be playing at about 111 beats per minute. And that sounds like this, by the way. And I play 4 beats for every metronome click. So it would be like this. So the 3-3-2 rhythm at this tempo sounds like this. So I'm going to play that for a couple minutes, or maybe not that long, maybe a minute or so, just see what this feels like. I'm not going to change the rhythm at all. And this is the flow tempo, but because I'm not doing a lot of variability, it's not going to necessarily get you into flow. So here we go. So as I described in different videos, as you go faster, you need more complexity and variability. At 7.5 beats per second, roughly, this is too repetitive. We need to change it up. So the trick is, how much do we do? And I did a video a while ago where I talk about the cognitive enhancement, where I'm doing a lot of variability, a lot of unpredictability in order to get the brain to work hard to decipher the patterns. And that's going to keep an aspect of flow from happening. So one of the important concepts of flow is not just this transition point between alpha and theta. It's the idea that the prefrontal cortex, a part of our brain that is our inner critic in a sense, our executive function, where we have impulse control. This part of the brain shuts down a little bit. And this is called transient hypofrontality. And the idea here is that by shutting this part of the brain down a little bit, that inner critic that stops us from considering new things shuts down, gets quiet. And all of a sudden now we become more open, and we become more able to make some abstract connections, and more able to be more creative in the process. You probably know some people with ADHD that are exceptionally creative people. I'm one of them. I get a ton done. I'm very creative when I'm working because it's easy for me. My brain tends to go into this place where the frontal part of my brain shuts down a little bit. This is a characteristic of a lot of people with ADHD. And one of the reasons that we have problems with impulse control, where we don't think through things we're gonna say, and we just blurt stuff out, or we do high risk behavior, or we can't focus when something becomes mundane, when something is a routine. Routines are the enemy to people with ADHD because the front part of our brain shuts down and we don't know how to activate it. The way to activate it is to give it some novelty, to give it something to activate it with. But the plus side with this propensity is that now we can get into flow much better, much more easily, because all we have to do is kind of bring our brains into this state primarily of the entrainment at the transition of alpha and theta. The rest takes care of itself. For you, for the average person that might not have ADHD, getting you into flow means I have to play a certain rhythms in a certain way, so as to not get you deciphering the pattern, activating your brain to decipher, and not being so repetitive that it becomes something your brain doesn't attend to. Just enough variability in there. And so I'm going to play that for you now. Actually, let me play for you first, highly complex, activating rhythms, so you can get a sense of what that feels like. That would sound like this. So at that point, your brain keys into it, and it's now trying to decipher patterns, trying to predict what's going to happen. Because there's a lot of chaos there, it's also wondering if it's a threat. So activation happens. And now the frontal lobes are not shutting down. The prefrontal cortex is staying active. It's not going into this deactivated state. So that's too much for most of us. So if I'm going to create this flow state, I'm going to play at the 7.4 beats per second. And I'm also going to create a musical variability to a pattern that is fairly predictable. So I'll play that 3-3-2 rhythm, but I'm going to vary it enough to make it interesting to keep your brain engaged to the entrainment aspect, but not so unpredictable that it activates the brain trying to decipher the pattern. And that's the balance we're going to strike here. So I'm going to play for a minute at this tempo. You can get a sense for what this feels like. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how we can use this both in playing and in listening. So here is 7.4 beats per second with enough variability to get your brain into a state called flow. And it sounds like this. The idea here is that I've got some musicality going on. You'll notice if you were to look at what I was playing, I'm playing in 4-bar phrases. I'm playing musically. And music is divided into the phrasing that you can kind of predict. We all listen to enough music that we know what a 4-bar phrase or an 8-bar phrase or 12 or 16 bars feels like. And we're kind of attuned to that cycle. And so we find it pleasing when you can hear the predictability of that cycle happening, even if there's slight variations on what I'm doing within that cycle. That's the idea of creating flow. Now, if you're playing a drum, you can get into an amazing state just by playing regardless of tempo. But flow is really a specific state of around 7 and 7.5 beats per second. So if you are going to play for yourself and you want to get into the actual flow state, you need to be able to play at this tempo. And it might take a while if you're a beginning drummer. It's a pretty fast tempo to play. You also need to play long enough to make it happen. When I started off doing rhythmic entrainment intervention years ago, I played live in people's living rooms. And even for the times when we started sending out cassettes back in the day, and then CDs when we finally had a CD player or CD recorder, I play live for each session. So if I made a recording for somebody, I'd sit down and I'd play for 20 to 25 minutes nonstop at 8 beats per second. That can be pretty exhausting after a while because it's a long time to be playing at a pretty good clip. If you're a beginning drummer, you're probably going to have a hard time even maintaining a couple minutes at 7.5 beats per second. So build up. It's okay if you're going slow to begin with. let yourself go into the deeper state of consciousness. That's totally fine. It's not flow, but it has its own benefits. So allow those to be what they are. In a lot of ways, the slower you go, the more of those abstract connections you're probably going to be able to make. But if you do play at 7.5 beats per second or so, you'll notice the residual effect of this, because there's been some research showing that if you can get into flow, that benefit of the flow, that silenced inner critic, for lack of a better way of describing it, does last for a while. So you might be able to play for a little while and then go off and do your project. That's kind of what I did when I first started really exploring this concepts of how to do focus and how to do calm. Not only did I get the effect initially when I'm playing, but there was a residual effect that lasted quite a while. It was really quite something. So as far as where to find music like this, the best place obviously is my music, because it's tailored to the way I approach this. And BrainShift Radio actually has a category that does this concept. And BrainShift Radio, by the way, is my streaming music site that has 7 categories of music to help get your brain into a very specific state. I'm going to play for you a little bit more flow rhythms. I'm going to play at about 7.4 beats per second for a little while. Just allow yourself to settle in. You know, now would be a great time to pick up a project you want to work on. Think about something you're trying to work on, problem you're trying to solve. Just kind of let yourself get into this place and see what it feels like. And then if you want to give BrainShift Radio a try next time you want to get into flow, go to brainshiftradio.com and sign up for a free trial. So here's 7.4 beats per second to get you into flow.